Welcome to another episode of TEAconf Talks, where we explore groundbreaking ideas shaping the future of accounting and financial technology. Today, we're going to find out what's on the agenda at next week's Triple Entry Accounting Conference. This will be the second Triple Entry Accounting Conference, TEAconf, and it is happening on April the 25th and 26th in beautiful Malta. Please come to teaconf.org to get more information and purchase your tickets. So in advance of the conference, we've been hosting a series of short talks on current topics and activities in TEA. Joining us today, I'm really happy to welcome conference co-chair Arthur Doohan, who is going to talk us through next week's talks and panel discussions. Thanks so much for joining me, Arthur. It's going to be a busy couple of days at the conference next week, so let's have a little chat about what we can look forward to. But before that, maybe you can explain briefly why you're interested in triple entry accounting and what made you want to involve yourself in the conference.
Hi, Rhian, and thanks for having me on. It's a two-stage answer. My biggest chunk of my career was as a capital markets trader in the City of London, and I gave it up voluntarily after 16, 17 years worth of work for a whole lot of reasons, but I was very discouraged by the impacts of super liquid capitalism and that kind of finance. And since leaving in the mid-90s, we've staggered from one disaster to another. So I've been acutely conscious of the overall weaknesses of the prevailing system. And the prevailing system is built of the original accounting paradigm for individual companies. Now, it gets extrapolated massively, and it gets converted into economics as well. But in engineering, we have a term about garbage in, garbage out, and it applies in many places. And so when the statistics are flawed and the raw material is flawed and can't be trusted, then there are obvious knock-on problems from that. So the other, since then, of course, I've met Ian and become a collaborator of Ian Griggs. And so triple entry accounting seems to me to answer an awful lot of the problems at the core of how we do business, how we do finance, and how we do economics. So that's where my motivation to be involved in comes from.
That's an absolutely great answer. And as we start talking about the conference and the agenda, you mentioned Ian, of course, Ian Grigg, and he's opening the conference, presenting his paper on unbreakable exchanges. What can you tell us about what he's going to be presenting?
So I haven't seen a full draft of the paper, but he has been acutely conscious of all of the problems that we've had in the crypto world since we've had the first significant paper from Satoshi Nakamoto. The underlying theory so far seems to be completely bulletproof. The robustness of Bitcoin supports that argument. But of course, if you implement it badly, then you can have problems with it. And we have seen many, many instances, almost as many instances in crypto failures as we have seen in classical finance things. And it turns out that most of those look to have been through abuses of accounting. Either those exchanges haven't done even proper double entry accounting. In certain cases, we know that there's been just single entry ledgers, which are massively open to abuse. And in other cases, there has been double entry accounting, but that has not been well executed. So again, to take triple entry accounting and push it into an exchange and implement it properly will give us a chance to have transparency and robustness built into not only the mathematics underpinning the cryptocurrencies themselves, but how the various facilities that we use to enable us to use the cryptocurrencies, we're going to make those bulletproof as well. And so he's been exploring applying triple entry accounting, how to build an exchange based on that. And he's going to elaborate and elucidate on that for us.
Yeah, I'm particularly looking forward to that because for those of us who are involved in the cryptosphere to any extent, it has been a perpetual problem. And to have something like Ian's mind on this is something we can all look forward to. So next up on day one, on the 25th, is another familiar face from the first TEAconf, Kostas Skantos. So what's he going to be talking about?
This is an informal conference of papers that are in process for being presented through MDPI at the second special issue around the T conference, but we don't have a full set of formally approved papers at this stage. A lot of it is work in progress, but Costas's paper is complete and has been published. So Costas's previous paper for us was AI related, as is this one. And he basically extended that metaphor and trying to explore how, again, going back to garbage in, garbage out, there's so much information packed into the realm of academia. And it needs to be, as it's now, as academia is merging rapidly into the AI world, sorting the wheat from the chaff, trying to combat plagiarism while at the same time protecting the identity of people supplying all of the information that's being put through the universities and their portals is becoming a huge task. And so using TEA and other blockchain type metrics to secure that data, but also to prove that data is what Costas's paper is about. And he seems to have found a way in. The subject is only being opened, but the quality of his paper and his contribution means that MDPI have been happy to. It has been through the peer review process and has been published, and it's a useful contribution to opening this debate. It's a huge field. It touches on privacy, and it touches on publicly verified information. So it's a very interesting contribution to opening up that field.
Thanks for that reminder about the papers and so on, and about the fact that Kostas's paper is accepted and published. And it's worth reiterating at this point that while everybody is talking about AI at the moment, obviously Kostas and Ian Grigg co-authored a paper about AI and blockchain way back. So it's just really interesting to see Kostas's further thoughts on this very, very, very important topic. That takes us through the morning of the first day. So coming into the afternoon, we're starting with a panel discussion facilitated by Juan Ibanez. What's the topic of the panel? What can we expect?
So again, to take a slight step back, the first conference was entirely academic papers, but triple entry accounting is a very practical real world tool addressing massive real world problems. And there are companies out there who are trying to implement it. And it is our hope for T conference that it will continue to be a joint commercial and academic program. For sure, I mean, triple entry accounting is more about practical applications than it is about academia. Although at the moment, our focus has in the past been on academia. So we're having two panel discussions at this conference, and we hope to be more equally balanced going forward, half academia, half commercial. But this is our first toe in the water with commercial aspects. And so Juan has done a review of where we are and what he sees as happening in the commercial world. A lot of the people who will be at the conference have got interests in or are actually commercially minded people themselves. And so we're hoping to have a panel discussion about where triple entry accounting is coming from and where it is going to, and what the emerging trends are and how it's being implemented. So it's our first venture into how opening a dialogue about how triple entry accounting is being used in the real world for accounting purposes.
I think it'll be an interesting change of pace and an interesting focus. And panel discussions are always quite an interesting format for new ideas and so on. So we're looking forward to that. And then, of course, day one's closing speaker is none other than yourself. Can you say something about your paper?
So, as alluded to earlier on, I'm a former capital markets banker, and I gave it up for a number of reasons, but mainly because I didn't want to be contributing to that completely wasteful and dangerous proclivity of economics and business. Um, Subsequently to that, I was a very unhappy bystander throughout the GFC. And it occurred to me that when banks get into trouble and their debts get moved instantly from AAA to junk by the ratings agency, that generates an enormous number of knock-on problems. And the bank debt becomes suddenly worth an awful lot less in the open market. But paradoxically, the one place left on the planet where bank debt is still worth its face value is back on the balance sheet of the bank that originates it. And so somebody who's holding bank debt ought to be able to redeem other debts at the bank using the bank's own debt. It's a very simple concept. If you've put your name on an IOU, I should be able to pay back the £100 I owe you either with cash or with a piece of paper that has your signature on it. In my mind, that simple moral principle doesn't change whether it's £100, £100,000, or £10 million. So there ought to be a way to finance this. Now, I've had this vetted. It wasn't taken up by the Ministry of Finance in Ireland in the teeth of the GFC for mainly political reasons, but it has been vetted by them and by many others, and there's no flaw in the accounting or any problem with that. What there is an issue about whether the banks will agree to do it. And so what I'm trying to do is to show there's a mechanism whereby doing this process can be fair to the banks, fair to the borrowers, and impose no tax burden, no burden on the taxpayer, which is normally what happens. We've had 40 years of the privatization of profits and the socialization of losses. And this would be a step away from that. And the triple entry accounting aspect of it is that we would use triple entry accounting to demonstrate to all of the stakeholders, the people whose debt is not in distress, the people who is, and the taxpayers and the banks, that we were doing this on an equitable and transparent basis. So it's an exploration of that topic. But if it was adopted, I think it would go a long, long way towards ameliorating bank crises, which are rapidly turning out to be the tail that's wagging the financial dog of the world.
I think we can all agree that we need some fresh ideas around this, and having spoken to you on numerous occasions about similar topics, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So day one is going to be packed with interesting conversations, talks and ideas. Moving on to day two, who are our morning speakers and what are they going to be talking about?
So our two morning speakers are going to be Andre Bonello and Hakeem. Andre is a past presenter at last year's conference where he did a paper on digital assistance, and this paper is an extension on that, whereby similar to the background in my paper or the use of TEA is to be able to show to people who are both contributing funds, whether that's the state or charities, into social assistance programs, and the users of those social assistance programs and the patrons of it. So, for instance, if you're funding a card for people to use either an ordinary shopping resource or a food bank or something like that, you would be able to demonstrate using TEA that without examining or exposing what people's shopping habits are and their personal situation, you'll be able to demonstrate that food is being fairly paid for and fairly distributed. Social assistance programs always bring up issues of why are they getting help and I'm not, and where's the money really going? And so Andre's paper is a further exploration of the work around using TEA to make that the equity and the fairness of that visible to all without giving away people's private situations.
That's going to be really interesting. And given that we often think about accounting in a very corporate sense, applying it to the social sphere, as it were, is, provides an interesting bit of variety. You mentioned,
Second paper
yes.
then actually follows on from exactly what you were saying. So one of Ian's other interests has been the growth and the helpfulness in difficult situations where the poorer people in societies are often excluded from mainstream economics. And particularly, this comes from his experience as in Kenya, where he discovered how prevalent and how useful the social savings clubs that they have in Kenya, which are called chamas, are. Now, as he's been exploring this, it turns out that in the researches that we've been doing, these kind of social savings clubs exist almost all over the world amongst the unbanked. They're called different things in different places and they have slightly different rules, but they operate in the same way. The drawback about them is that they clearly provide a robust defense against predation and corrupt institutions that like to predate on these people if they try to use regular finance. And very often they're not even allowed into regular finance. They're very useful and they perform a very protective environment for people to apply their savings. But they're also quite limited. They can't scale, they can't grow beyond a certain size because you're looking at small numbers of people and small number. They're so weak that in fact most people will be a member of 2 or 3 clubs and spread their risk around them. So Ian's project, or one of Ian's projects, is to develop the software around making these savings clubs more transparent and more easy to operate for their users. But once you document them and make them transparent and put them on the blockchain using triple entry, where you make the numbers more robust, you make the numbers robust and readable to third parties, and probably more importantly, you make them readable to other savings clubs. And you would be in a situation where you might be able to federate savings clubs and help them move to the next level of finance. The savings clubs tend to be either just purely defensive as savings clubs, or to be investing in things like taxis and all the rest of it. But if you could federate them and put 20 of them together, you'd be able to say, well, actually, let's start building a small shopping mall, or let's invest in a small factory or something like that. And you would go some way towards enabling these quite large of savings pools that are not very mobile and not very accessible to people and that don't scale well. You would be able to make them scalable and mobile and more productive. So Hakeem has been doing some of the underpinning work of moving that project forward, and Hakeem is going to be reporting on the progress on that project.
That's going to be really interesting, a technical and mathematical approach to social purpose. And like the previous talk, just adding a slightly different flavour to what people might think of as being quite a corporate conversation. So that takes us up to lunch on the 26th. And moving on to the afternoon, we've got another panel. This one's going to be facilitated by Jorge Sunder, who of course is a previous TEAconf speaker, and we've also had him on TEAtalks. So what's this panel about?
So the other side of the coin of having triple entry accounting being deployed to support businesses and commerce and finance is that all of this takes place within the context of a regulatory environment. And Jorge has had some experience of engaging with regulators and is making progress on that front. So Jorge will be hosting a panel discussion shaped around his experiences of what the attitude of the regulators and the authorities and the banking institutions are towards triple entry accounting, and what kind of progress he's making on gaining acceptance there, and what their disposition is towards these kind of changes. But a really interesting conversation. We may have 1 or 2 regulators in the room with us at the moment. are potentially coming. They haven't yet confirmed, but he has had considerable exposure to them in the last 18 months, and we're looking forward to hearing what he has to say about their attitude to triple entry accounting.
That should be really, really valuable insights coming out of that panel. I'm really looking forward to that one. And I guess that means we're coming to the end of the 2 days of conversation. We just have one talk left, which I believe is going to be a remote speaker. Who is going to be doing the final session, and what's the topic?
So our good friend Ted Rivera from California is somewhat preoccupied with getting a couple of projects off the ground in California to do with the movie business. I think he has a movie almost ready to come out of pre-production and actually start shooting. So Ted is going to come and talk to us about the latest evolution in his work on crowdfunding and bringing together disparate resources to get this kind of project, this crowdfunded type of project off the ground, again, using triple entry for transparency and mobility of the finance and the fairness of making returns and accounting, or as it often happens in the show business, accounting for the losses. But that's where Ted is coming from with this paper. It's going to be a little bit later, I think at 5 o'clock on the Saturday, but that's because Ted is having to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and do a presentation on a Saturday morning. So we've had a compromise over the time. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing Ted's talk on this.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a great couple of days, and I'm really, really glad that you've been able to give us quite a detailed taster of what we can look forward to. Have you got any other closing thoughts?
I think we're pretty happy. It has evolved, and we are taking a step forward towards what we think the long-term vision for the conference should be. Looking forward to seeing my friends and some new faces in Malta at the end of the month.
Yes, I second that. I think it's going to be a great couple of days. If you're listening and you haven't already got a ticket, don't forget that the second TEA conference is happening next week, April 25th to 26th in Malta. Visit TEAconf.org for tickets and details, and we'll be back soon with some more discussions around this fascinating topic. Thanks for joining us, Arthur, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.